Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. Our guest this week is Rus Bradburd. He is a former college coach and is an author and a professor here at New Mexico State University. Russ has also been involved in some work in teaching the game of basketball along the border. And now we'll introduce a package that will show his work called Basketball in the Barrio.
The Segundo Barrio is the oldest neighborhood in El Paso, and it's always been an area of transition. People coming from east to west or north to south. The writer Dagoberto Gilb calls it the Hispanic Ellis Island.
This is one of the poorest zip code in the nation.
Our idea for the camp was that we wanted kids who couldn't afford college basketball camps to get good coaching, but also to be exposed to the art and history of their own area.
To have that opportunity to send their kids to do basketball and to get involved, that is great, because there's no way they can get that anywhere else. You know, they're not able to send their kids to camps or workshops at the university or at the high school level. For Steve and Russ to bring the program here, that's very special.
The camp began as a tribute to Rocky Galarza. Rocky was a boxing trainer here in Segundo Barrio for 30 years. He trained kids for free. And it really made me re-examine the reasons I was in coaching. Like, here was a guy that was coaching kids for free. And so the camp is sort of a tribute to Rocky Galarza, who died about 12 or 13 years ago. And it was a way to keep his name alive and a way to keep his memory alive in his own neighborhood.
Nice and low. Nice and low.
The camp is only maybe a third basketball and the rest is educational. Music, dance, storytelling, all from the border tradition. And so after about an hour of basketball, we quickly go into educational stuff. I think kids today learn what it means to be an American by reading magazines and books and seeing television shows, but it doesn't really relate to what it's like to grow up in Segundo Barrio. And so we want the kids from Segundo Barrio to feel special and to feel as though this is a unique place to be from.
They learn how to develop new attitudes. They get motivated about life, about keeping going, about school. And that, to me, that's the most important thing.
Basketball in the Barrio is in its 15th season. It's for kids 6 to 10 years old, boys and girls. It costs $1, and it's open only to kids from Segundo Barrio. And for $1, they get basketball, a t-shirt, a poster, and a bilingual children's book.
Well, first we had to dribble around some people, and then we had to do some difficult things. We had to do it around our legs, do it around our head, do it around our waist, and do it around our
I think the idea is to make someone feel special, have a sports experience be positive. It's totally non-competitive.
It doesn't matter where you're from, as long as you have the right surroundings and you have things like this to show them that they're important, I think is key.
All of the drills are strictly skills and techniques. There's no games being played. It's all individual skills and techniques, and it's so they'll learn to have confidence with the ball, dexterity, concentration.
It's a nice thing to come back and show the kids what I know and what I learned, especially now that I'm playing basketball in Mexico, knowing that I started from here and I took the skills that they showed me here and applying to my game. It really means a lot.
there's a great warmth here and a great feeling of love and tradition, and people are very proud to be from this area. We want the kids to feel that there's a history and a tradition behind them, besides a great future ahead of them.
Russ Bradford joins us now to talk about basketball in the barrio and also his new novel called Make It, Take It, which examines the role of big-time college athletics and academics and how the players on the court and off the court adjust to dealing with both of them. Russ, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Anthony. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about how basketball in the barrio went.
Well, I started it back in the early 90s. It was kind of a reaction to the overpriced college camps. Kids in El Paso particularly can't afford expensive college camps. They're often $250 or $300 for the week, and it just seemed odd to me that we were already overpaid, I felt like. And it seemed odd to me to be making money off children in the summer. So I got the idea to do a cheaper camp. And then when Rocky Galarza died, he was a dear friend of mine, and he trained kids for free for years. And it sort of made me re-examine, the reasons I got into coaching basketball was because I loved basketball and I liked kids. But after a while, that wasn't the reason I remained in coaching. And I think a lot of coaches are like that, where they start coaching for one reason and they keep coaching for quite a different reason. And it sort of made me re-examine what I'd got into the game for. And so we've been doing it now. It's coming up, it's approaching a 20-year anniversary, and it happens every Father's Day weekend in El Paso.
So how was it coordinating the game of basketball, learning the techniques and skills to molding it with the community and the culture?
Well, part of it for me was, it was little kids. It was 6 to 10-year-olds, and I've been teaching dribbling skills for a long time. But after a while, 6 to 10-year-olds can't focus on basketball anymore, and you wear them out. And we thought, well, we've got to do something besides basketball here. And so slowly over the years, we've integrated more and more cultural stuff, music and dance and storytellers and art and those kinds of things. And so partly because I got exhausted teaching basketball every minute, and I got bored with it, and I thought we have to do something here. And I realized, Segundo Barrio is a really unique place. It is. It's the Ellis Island for Mexican Americans, and really a neighborhood in transition all the time, and a very poor neighborhood, but also a really wonderful and culturally rich neighborhood. And it's such a unique place. I thought we've got a chance to do something different. So the camp has sort of morphed into, it started with all dribbling skills in the early 90s, and it's sort of morphed into this very unusual camp.
So how has the community embraced the camp?
Well, I often, many of the coaches at the camp now are former kids. The camp's been going on long enough that many of the kids go on to play at Bowie High School, which is the local high school, and then come back and they work for us as counselors. And I think all the great teaching that happens, I'm not a big fan of online academics or online teaching. I think all the great teaching that's happened in human history happens from person to person. It gets handed down, and any kind of tradition, whether it's storytelling or music or dance or boxing or basketball, if it misses a generation, then it can often be lost. And so Rocky was a boxing coach that the camp is dedicated to. He's the man the camp is dedicated to. And he was handing down the tradition of boxing, which is a huge part of the Hispanic community. I couldn't teach boxing, not without getting hurt badly. And so I started, I thought this is a way to keep his name alive and to hand down these traditions from person to person.
So what are your hopes and dreams, I guess, for the legacy of the camp to be?
Well, the camp has turned into something that I didn't anticipate, this way of keeping South El Paso culture alive and making kids in South El Paso feel special. Originally, the camp was very much my way of a tribute to keep Rocky Galarza's name alive, this guy who'd meant a lot to me and was a dear friend of mine. That he died in 1997. But for me, it was just a way to remember Rocky Galarza. And it's sort of morphed into other things. And I think other people have commented on the effect that it has on the community. I don't really know. I can't say if it's changed the community or been that much of a positive force in the community. Just that it's my way of remembering Rocky.
I see. Well, you talk about doing that just for the love of the game and to pay homage to your friend. In your new novel, Make It, Take It, an assistant coach seems to be struggling with his love of the game, Steve Pytel. And could you tell me a little bit about this novel and how it deals with coaching and the players and how they interact, and just really the game of big-time college basketball?
Yeah, well, I quit coaching in 2000, and I got very interested in the writing classes here at New Mexico State. I met the novelist Robert Boswell on campus, and he was a basketball fan. So we'd often get together, and I'd want to talk about books, and he'd want to talk about basketball. But both Robert Boswell and his wife, Antonia Nelson, and then a man named Kevin McElvoy, they were the teachers, the writing professors here in the fiction department. And I got very interested. I was always a big reader, and I'd read on my way to road games and read on scouting trips and that kind of thing. But I became very interested so I started sitting in on the classes. And I got very interested in trying to tell my story of what happened to me in college basketball. You know, Anthony, I was 24 years old when I began as a college coach, very young, and it was very much a fast lane. And my career was over by the time I was 40. And it began as a way to try and explain to the world what it was like coaching in college basketball. Now I know it really wasn't so much about that as trying to understand myself what had happened to me in college basketball.
I see. So you coach for some big names too. Just pretty much in the book. I mean, it's the assistant coach is also coaching with a big time coach who came in, has a big time salary, big time ego, and is trying to build a winning program in a place that that has extremely high pressure. It seems like around every corner.
Well, first I'll say, Anthony, that people ask me, why don't you write about Lou Henson? But fiction is about trouble and problems and betrayal and lies. And I've told people for years, Lou is too nice a person. Lou Henson would be the most boring fictional character on the planet because of that. But one of the things that happened, with the Penn State scandal and the scandal at Notre Dame, these are programs that are under intense scrutiny for 24/7. There's a camera on Penn State football and Notre Dame football, and yet it turns out we don't know anything about Penn State football. We don't know anything about Notre Dame football, as it turns out, despite the constant media attention. And so my idea was to try and take readers, before Penn State unfolded or Notre Dame unfolded, I had this idea to take readers past, the glare of the television, even past the locker room. And one of the advantages of fiction is that there's interiority. You can portray what a character is thinking, which in ESPN can't portray what anybody is thinking, and neither can Sports Illustrated, and so it's just difficult to really get inside the game. And I felt like I had this great advantage, as I'd come from this strange and interesting world that a lot of people are interested in.
How real is, although we're talking about fiction, how real is this? I mean, as far as the characters in this, have you came across coaches in the big time world of Division I athletics that could maybe resemble?
Well, originally the head coach in Make It Take It, a man named Jack Hood, was based on a dear friend of mine named Dick Fick. And Dick Fick was the Morehead State coach that drank himself into oblivion and drank himself into an early grave. But he was a really fascinating and interesting and smart and fun guy. He was a big reader himself. And so originally he was the model for that, but he became sort of too limited. I needed him to sort of branch out into other, Dick wasn't married at the time I knew him, but he needed to have a wife and those kinds of things. So that he was the original model, and I can say that now. Dick died maybe 6 or 7 years ago, but he was one of the last chapters in the book is based on his demise, and that was based on what had happened to Dick Fick. But all of the other, I would say that I would argue that most of the book is true, but very little of it is literally true. And I think it's one of the advantages of fiction is you can get at a truth that's not at a literal truth that it's difficult to do in nonfiction or television or movies or documentary film. I think, I would say the greatest book ever written about the Great Depression is Grapes of Wrath, but that's a fictional account of Tom Joad and their trip from Oklahoma to California. That's completely fabricated, although it's based on a truth that's hard to get at if you're writing nonfiction.
I found it interesting the way you wrote all of your characters in this novel. you told it from the perspective from each coach and also from the players, the star players on the team. When talking about the coaches, it seems like the more experience the coaches had, the more jaded they were of the game and the whole process of dealing with pressure in big-time college sports.
I think that's very true, and our program is Fronteras, and there's a real border between the coaches and the players. It's often the players against the coaches, and any coach who's losing, regardless of what they tell you, grows to really dislike the players. No coach wants to say this is all my fault. It's generally it's the players. It's Lou Henson's the only coach I've ever been around that didn't blame the players when things went badly, and it's sort of I think there is a border between the players and the coaches, and there's a big border between athletics and academics. Even at New Mexico State, which isn't as big time as, it's not Notre Dame football, it's not Penn State football, but it's an important part of our campus life. But athletics is way off over on the corner of campus, and I think that even when I was coaching, there was a lot of departments had no idea what they did in engineering, or had no idea where this building was or that building was, and you get sort of isolated. It's its own peculiar world. And the same can happen, I'm sure, that engineering doesn't have great familiarity with our English department, but as I think one of the difficult things to do is to bridge these borders between coaches and players and between the team and the academic side of the university. There's these tremendous lines and divisions but I think that makes for interesting fiction, even if it makes for problematic universities.
Well, your coach, your character, the assistant coach, Steve Pytel, seems to be navigating all of those areas throughout this whole book, and even towards the end of the book, I mean, he seems to grow into someone that it seems to be where he knows no limits to getting to where he wants to be, which is a possible head coach position.
Yeah, I think people have asked me, am I the character that Steve Pytel takes up in the novel? And I think I'm actually there's 4 coaches that get portrayed, and I think I'm actually part of all of them, and especially the bad parts, I'm embarrassed to admit. But I think that one of the things that happens to all coaches is we get lost in a way, where we start because we love the game and we love kids, but that's not what keeps us going at all. It's very competitive. It's about money, and there's huge, New Mexico State's pretty moderate. The coach at University of New Mexico makes twice what the Aggie basketball coach makes, but still there's a lot of money at stake, and there's big egos at stake. And there's there's just television revenue and concession stands and season tickets, and so because the stakes are so high, I think that the focus, it's a beautiful game, basketball, but I kind of lost that myself. I sort of forgot what a beautiful game it was. But the other interesting thing, Anthony, is that I was never as interested in the X and O's and the statistics. What always interested me was the stories. And I think in retrospect, basketball was a window into African American culture, particularly. Like, I know hundreds of African Americans, but all of them are through basketball. And it gave me this window into this cool kind of culture, especially in the 70s when playground basketball was really burgeoning. It gave me this window into a culture that I would have had no idea of how to approach otherwise. And in retrospect, that window into black culture and the window into the stories that are behind, I worked for Don Haskins for 8 years, and I knew immediately this guy would be a great character in a book. It was like he might as well have been on horseback, and so that part of the game always interested me more, and I think has served me better. I couldn't tell you the final score of any basketball game that I've ever watched or played, but I could tell you the stories behind what's going on, on the screen.
It also seems that there's stories with the coaches, but there's also stories with the players as well. In your novel, The Star Player, Jamal Davis, he comes into it with the story with, when we meet him, he has a pregnant girlfriend, and he's a very innocent guy. But then as the story goes on, he's faced with many difficult choices to continue throughout his playing career that most people wouldn't think would happen to a regular college student going through the university.
I think that's right. Is one of the things that I think happens in the book is that the characters are faced with choices, and the book is not a condemnation of college sports. I think I have very strong opinions about college sports, but you wouldn't get them so much from the novel. I think I think everyone in the novel is innocent, and everyone in the novel is guilty, and just as all humans, I think, are imperfect. That's what I was going for. Is not a condemnation of college sports, but to show characters at a crossroad and deciding, often the characters are doing the wrong thing but for the right reason, or they're doing the right thing for the wrong reason. And I think that seems to me to be very true. I don't think, as like I've met Marvin Menzies, and he seems like he's a good coach and a good guy, but I know he's not a perfect guy because he's a human being. And to me, that's a much more interesting person to write about than someone that's been held up as perfect. And I think, as we know from Penn State, I think Paterno was seen as a saint, but it's clearly he's not a saint. Unfortunately, he's just a human being like the rest of us. That makes for better fiction, and as you said, characters at the crossroads having to make choices are sort of what I was after.
And it also seems that the other star player, Leonard Redmond, seems to have been, in what you wrote about, you said he was pretty much 18, I guess, was he 18 going on 30?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
He's more jaded. He's older than Jamal Davis in the book, and I wanted to pair two characters together that were very different. Here's the jaded one, who's maybe more talented and a more advanced player at this stage, and Jamal Davis is the church kid that gets his eyes open to what the real world is like in college basketball. And I think that's one of the things that happens is both players undergo a change, but they're sort of clinging to their past and clinging to what they think is true. And that felt very true to me. And neither of those are based on any one person, but I got to, after, I've been working on this book for a long time, and so I feel like I know Jamal Davis and Leonard Redmond pretty well. I think they both still have bright futures ahead of them, despite what happens in the book.
It sounds like they do. You said you've been working on this book since 1997?
Well, I began taking classes with Robert Boswell in the late 90s. First I sat in on the classes, and then I'd audit the classes, and then I started doing it full time, and he was really great and really supportive. And Boswell went to all the Aggie home games at the time, and we used to play those big Monday games. But even if it was a road game, we'd always be back by Tuesday afternoon, and I could always get to it. So he started having classes on Tuesday night to sort of make room for me, and I never missed a class. And never, even when I was coaching, working a 70-hour week, I was always sort of able to keep up with my work. And that's sort of, I got more and more interested in it, and I just ran out of gas, frankly. I don't see how, I worked for Don Haskins and Lou Henson, but I didn't have that kind of endurance that they do. They're remarkable men for their, able to stick to a task I can stick to a task for a long time, but not 40 years like those guys could.
Well, one of your books, 40 Minutes of Hell, which was about the amazing life of Nolan Richardson, was a biography. It was a really an account of one of the most amazing lives in college basketball history. But I was wondering, what's more difficult, writing for fiction or writing for about reality?
Well, I think from my experience, other writers might disagree, but with Nolan Richardson, I had such an incredible story. I had a big pile of stories and research and interviews, and I just had to strip it away and try and get to the heart of his story. In fiction, we start with a blank page, and to me, that's more intimidating. I'd rather see the big pile of information on Nolan Richardson and keep sanding away and sculpting away at it. But there were times with working on Make It Take It where I just sort of sit and kind of stare at the screen and think, well, now what do I do? Whereas with Nolan, it was just a matter of, just like he was personally, it was like careening downhill, and I just had to sort of steer the wild roller coaster ride that his life was. And in this one, it was actually more daunting to have nothing and have to try and build a story out of nothing.
We just have a couple minutes left, but I'm curious, what skills were you able to take from your coaching career and put those into being a writer?
It's a really good question, and the first is we worked 70-hour weeks, and so when when I worked with Lou especially, he really worked a 70-hour week. Don Haskins, not so much. He'd be off in his truck a lot. I think he thought about the game all the time, but with Lou, I remember the first week I was with Lou, I got into the office at 8, and he'd clearly been there earlier. So I got there at 7:45 the next day, and he was already there then. And you know, I realized I've got to get to the office at 7 if I'm going to keep up with this guy. He was in his late 60s by that time. But I learned how to work hard. And but the other thing, you know, there is a similarity between what happens with basketball players and what happens with writers. Is with basketball players, you go practice on your own, work on your shot and your dribbling, and then you get together with the group, and you realize, I've got a lot to learn. I've got to get better at this, I've got to get better at that, and you go back by yourself. Well, the same thing happens with writers, particularly at a university, is you write on your own, it's a lonely job, but then you get together in the class with the workshop, and you get your weaknesses pointed out to you and exposed, and if you're willing to listen to that kind of process, you can go back alone and keep working. And then, you know, of course, the final product, we hope, is that a book comes out, and that there is nothing wrong with it, that it's perfect the way it is. But so that process of practicing by yourself and getting together with the group is actually very similar.
Let's see, what do you, as far as your books, what can you take that you hope to pass on to your students as far as your writing experience and passing on to them?
Really, the only thing I'm an example of, Anthony, is that you know, I never took an English class in college, and my first English classes were fiction workshops with Robert Boswell. But you can sort of start by being, you know, sort of a total beginner, and through effort and time. I was very lucky to be associated with them, but a lot of it for me, it wasn't natural talent or inspiration, but more the idea that I could sort of roll up my sleeves and stick with it for long periods of time. That's really the only thing I'm an example of. I'm not the talent that, you know, that my colleague Lily Huang is much more talented than I am, but I hope that I can just sort of roll up my sleeves and you know, unplug the phone, roll up my sleeves, turn off the internet, and keep working at it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony.
Our guest was Rus Bradburd. He is an author and a professor here at New Mexico State University. He joined us to talk about his new novel, Make It, Take It, and also about basketball in the barrio here in the region. I'm Anthony Moreno. This has been Fronteras, A Changing America.